Hi, my name is Abby Motter, and I'm a program associate at the Shared Youth Mobility Center. Today we are talking with Audra and Mary from Whatcom Transportation Authority of Washington about the Lynden Hop microtransit program, as well as the new fixed route service. The Lynden Hop was initially established in 2021 through the Federal Transit Administration's Integrated Mobility Innovation Program, or IMI. The IMI grant supported the Lynden Hop through its pilot phase starting in 2021 with service ending in 2024. Mary and Audra are here to discuss how the development, implementation, and the phasing out of the Lynden Hop service happened, as well as service changes that Whatcom Transportation Authority has implemented to continue to reach former Lynden Hop users. Thank you for being here with us today, Mary and Audra. To get us started, can you introduce yourselves and share a bit about WTA and also explain how the Lynden Hop project came to be?
Sure. I'll go ahead and start. So my name is Mary Anderson, and I'm the Senior Transit Planner at WTA, and I was the project manager for the Lynden Hop. I was also part of the team that wrote the grant application. So WTA is a small urban transit agency. We're located in Washington State. We are in Washington State. We're kind of in the upper left corner. Our county borders Canada. And the population of the entire county is about 220,000. And how the Lynden Hop project came to be, so basically, small towns can be really hard to serve well with fixed route. And this is something that we have known as staff. This is something that our board of directors are aware of. And so at one point, one of our board of directors in a board meeting held up this paper and said, "Hey, I read this thing about microtransit. Like, is that something you think you guys could try?" And we said, sure, we'll look into it. And so we, we're looking into ways to better serve the small cities that are in our county.
I'll just take a quick minute. I'm Audra Stiles. I'm the Grants and Revenue Manager at WTA. I've been here about 10 years and have a background in grant management. I was on the team, not that originally brought in the grant for the Lynden Hop, but on the evaluation team on the back end. So.
Great. In terms of the Lynden Hop, what vision or challenges was WTA trying to overcome with the Lynden Hop or microtransit service in general?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, small towns can be hard to serve well with fixed routes. And so what we were trying to do, or our objectives with the grant, was to test the effectiveness and usage of on-demand public transportation in a small city and assess the scalability of operating on-demand service in-house and achieve a per-trip cost equal or lower than that of a paratransit trip. So those were the objectives that we wrote out in the grant itself. But really, what we were trying to do is just to find out, is it possible to operate microtransit in-house? Because at the time, we wrote the grant in 2019. We were awarded on March 15th, 2020. If anybody remembers, I can think, if you haven't totally blocked that week off from your memory, it was the day before, at least in Washington State, that all the schools went to homeschool and kind of the everything shut down. So it was a very, very interesting time to start a brand new project, but I digress. And so at that time, I'm not aware of any agencies. There maybe have been one or two that were operating in-house. Most agencies were contracting with VIA or some other type of service. So that was actually one of the kind of, I think, selling points in our grant, was that we said, hey, we want to try this in-house and see if that's possible.
And what was that experience like for staff operating in-house? I know you don't really have a lot to compare it to, as you weren't working with a turnkey vendor to start, but was there anything specifically that staff ran into in terms of challenges or like strengths along those lines?
Yeah, so I would say one of the best reasons to operate it in-house is that we had access to all of the data. And so in talking with some of my peers across the nation and locally here in Washington State, they would have to fight tooth and nail to get data from their vendors. Whereas we had it all, right there in our database. So if we wanted to find out, what are the origin destinations, how many trips are taking place, how many people are, or how many trips are each person taking, like we could just run a report versus having to go through this kind of third-party vendor to find out if they would even give that information, because they sometimes wouldn't. Sometimes they would say, nope, that's private information, we're only going to share this small subset of data. So we also, the other really big selling point was that we have control over the staff. And so all of the drivers, we actually ended up using transit operators. And so they're trained to the same level, obviously, as our fixed route drivers and paratransit drivers. So we're confident with the people who were out there, driving the vans, that they were going to provide the same level of service and the same level of professionalism that anybody would expect from a WTA employee. And what else? I had one other thing. Yeah, I think just having the control over it is really is very beneficial.
I will add, I was in operations
thank you. Yep.
I was just going to say, I was in operations at the time, and the customer service level was very high. People, when they were calling in, they could ask about fixed route or paratransit or the Lynden Hop, and they could book a ride directly. They weren't being put in a long queue. The customer service reps could help them, decide which service was better for them and answer all of their questions about our own service.
Yeah,
There was
thank you,
also some
Audra.
depth of drivers. We didn't have to cancel routes because people were sick. We had a deep extra board that we could pull from so that there was the continuity of service.
Yeah, that's a great point. The other thing I neglected to mention is, like, from the beginning when we wrote this grant, we wrote it as operating it in-house, and part of that was also the grant writers. We felt strongly about providing a living wage and providing benefits, and from what I had heard of some of the other operations, is that maybe the drivers of these kind of turnkey services were getting paid very low wages and not like an official employee of the transit agency. So that just didn't feel right for us, for our project and our community.
Have you heard firsthand from anyone in the community or a rider or driver about how the Lynden Hop program impacted them?
Yes. So I would say from the riders, they loved the service, of course. I mean, it was a door-to-door or curb-to-curb, excuse me, a curb-to-curb service for $1 or often free. So of course, who wouldn't love that? And it was much more convenient than having to, book a paratransit trip the day before and then wait, up to, possibly an hour, or, having to walk to the fixed route bus. So of course, for all the reasons that we know why people like on-demand services and microtransit, people liked it. And there are some great quotes that that are in the report, actually, that I'll share with you. But one of my favorite was this, a senior citizen who wrote a letter to the editor of the Lynden newspaper saying quite a few things, but the one that stood out was, the Lynden Hop has given me my independence back, which is so, I know, it's very touching. It was really, really great. And then we heard, for example, from some parents whose kids would ride the Lynden Hop home from sports practice, because there isn't school bus transport, at least in our community, home from after school sports. And so one woman in particular said, this is great. I don't have to leave work early to go pick my kid up and drive them home. So stories like that are, why we do what we do. And then for the drivers, it was a very popular shift. It was what we call the markup, when the drivers choose what shift they're going to drive for the next 3 to 4 months, and it was always the first to go, because I think there were only like 3 or 4 slots. And it was like, boom, right away. Audra can attest to that since she was in operations at that time.
That's true. The drivers liked, of course, driving that smaller vehicle. Having a lot of regular passengers. They love when they can have that passengers get on that they know and that they've developed a relationship with. And that they kind of it's why people like to drive paratransit. There's a known quantity of riders. You know who's getting on your bus. And so they were very popular shifts. And so our operators bid according to their seniority. And it's usually the drivers who had been here the longest and had the most seniority that got those shifts because they were so well liked.
And feeding into that, how did WTA define or measure success in terms of the Lynden Hop? And did any other valuable insights emerge from the project?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we had those 3 objectives. So, one of them was, for the cost per ride to be less than a paratransit, and it was. And the exact numbers are in the report that I'm going to send you, but it was about, $60 per trip for the Lynden Hop, whereas paratransit was about $80 per trip. So that, check that box. That was, we found out that we met that goal. And like we said, people loved it. It was a successful program. In terms of, assessing the scalability of operating on demand in-house, that was one of the reasons that we ended up ending the pilot project, is that we found it was not financially sustainable or replicable in its current form in other areas across Whatcom County.
And is there any... Oh, sorry, yeah. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. I just was like looking at my notes to see if there was anything else, but that's gotcha. Fine.
Okay. And is there anything else that contributed to WTA phasing out the Lynden Hop service?
Yeah, so basically, when we were, I'm just trying to pull up my, okay, sorry. When we were evaluating the service and looking at the service that was in the city of Lynden compared to the other small cities in the county, at the time, Lynden had the Route 26, the fixed route, that had hourly service. At that time, it was hourly. Was it hourly at that time? I can't remember.
That's right.
Okay, it was. Thank you. Yeah, so it had hourly service 7 days a week, which is pretty typical for a small city of that size. And then we also had the Lynden Hop, and there was paratransit, of course. And then comparing that to Ferndale, which is another small city, almost the exact same population as Lynden. Lynden had double the revenue hours, which basically means like double the amount of service allocated to it compared to Ferndale. So that's not like saying fair is the right word, but it was out of balance. The amount of service, yeah.
Considering that the largest part of our revenue comes from sales tax, it felt out of balance.
Yeah. Thank you. And so when we looked at what was the estimated cost that we were providing for the service in Lynden, just for the fixed route and the Lynden Hop, not counting paratransit, it was about 2.2 million. And then comparing that to Ferndale, it was 1.2 million. So that's, that kind of brings it down to kind of normalizing like how much we're reinvesting in each of those areas with, like I said, almost identical population base.
And now that service is concluded, how is WTA supporting riders who previously relied on the service?
Yeah, so we did actually make one change to the Route 26 when we decided to end the pilot project. So one thing that we learned through both our survey data and just from knowing like I said, having access to the data and knowing where the bus was going, is that by far the most popular trip type was shopping. And so we actually rerouted the Route 26 to get closer to the Safeway shopping complex. So that was one positive change that we made, and added a bus stop with a shelter, so it could be a more comfortable environment to wait. And then we still have paratransit, and we still have the fixed route service. So it's definitely not as convenient as it was, for sure, when we had the curb to curb service, and there is still a pretty good amount of service in that area.
And how did the community respond to, well, one, the first iteration of Lynden Hop? Like, how did they respond to it being implemented? And then how did they respond to the phase out?
Yeah, great question. So I would say it was a little bit slow to gain in popularity, but once the word of mouth spread and people found out how great it was, it's pretty quickly we were seeing about 60 rides per, or 60 trips per day, which is kind of the max that we could sustain, and still have reliable wait times for people. And so people, of course, loved it. We had a great photo. This is kind of a funny story. We had our drivers just out before the project even launched, doing test trips, just booking fake trips and driving the van around. And they get to one house and they're just waiting there, and this guy comes running out, and he was like, "Hey, I'm the mayor of Lynden and I'm on your board of directors and I'm so excited to see this." And it was just really funny because it was the house next door that they were fake stopping at. And so it was just really funny that small town that the mayor comes running out. And so they got a picture with him, and then that went on the front of the local Lynden paper. It was really funny. But that's the type of stuff that, especially for those small towns, when you have, people, trusted, people in power that are saying, "Hey, this is a great service, this is safe, this is reliable, you should try it." That works phenomenally, probably in all cities, but especially in smaller cities, for sure. And then we would get, people, would call and, give us kudos often about the service. And once it became more popular, we would also get calls saying "I can't book a trip, I've been trying, it says it's an hour wait time." And that's, kind of the success of microtransit is also its failure, where it becomes too popular and then people can't book a trip, so they stop riding it, or they can't get to where they want to go when they want to go and get frustrated. And then the only way to really solve that or fix that on the transit agency side is to add another van, which is very costly to do, especially since the ridership, really the maximum ridership you could ever hope to have is maybe 3 to 5 per hour, which is very low, especially compared to a fixed route service. It's comparable to paratransit for sure, but when you're thinking about how much the agency, and we're funded by taxpayers, so how much is the community paying per ride? It definitely starts to add up, and that's when you really have to think about what is the best way for us to be fiscally responsible and provide the best service to the most people that we can. Mm-hmm. Oh, and then you asked about the phase out when we ended it. People were sad, of course. We did a lot of outreach. We held, actually I have, let me see if I can find that. I actually have a slide that showed, oh, well, I don't know, I can send it to you later, but we did, a number of public meetings, or we gathered information, open house type things to get information from people. We had our Engage WTA site where people could provide comments. And then of course, people can, provide comments by calling or, talking to their drivers as well. And yes, people were sad about it, of course, because it's a great service. And for the most part, not everybody, but many of the majority of the trips were still within either the fixed route corridor or the paratransit corridor. So most of the trips could theoretically be possible on another mode of transit. Will it be as convenient? No, definitely not. But still possible in many instances.
And after the service, we did see an increase in paratransit service. So we knew that the Lynden Hop was taking some of those paratransit trips. And it's a little less convenient to have to book paratransit, but the transfer says that we were still helping those people.
And in terms of community engagement, how are you going about like getting a feel for what the community thought of both the rollout and the phase out?
So we did a passenger survey in, I think it was May of 2023, and that was as like part of the IMI grant that was with, I forget who the nonprofit was, or I don't know if they were a nonprofit, but there was a group that was contracted to help all of the grantees with that. So we did a passenger survey at that point. At the very, very beginning, before we even launched, we also did a couple of surveys with the community to find out, just one, to let Lynden know, hey, we got this grant. This is what we're thinking of doing. These are kind of the hours. This is the boundary that we're looking at. What do you think? And we got some information and comments from that, which did encourage us to make a couple of changes specifically to the boundary that we were going to be serving. And then we're always, because most of the people were calling to book their trips, they could also provide feedback at that time to the customer service representatives, or provide feedback to the drivers when they're, being driven to their destinations. But I don't know if Audra, if you have anything else to
Oh, we did
add.
have like the surveys that were on route, cards would come back and people seemed to be enthusiastic about filling those out. And I remember there were lots of comments on what they liked, what they thought we could do better, how much, they appreciated it. And so we did get public comment when it went away. People had come to rely on, and they had kind of learned the tips and tricks because we were booking full every day, had learned exactly when to call and how to, the regular riders, be sure that they got those rides booked, and it had become a part of their everyday life. And so there was a transition when that service went away. I think that being really transparent about the why helped. I honestly haven't heard any comments about it recently, and I think that when the public understood how expensive this service was and that it was a pilot and grant funded, they understood the why of what we were doing and were more accepting of why we had to end it.
And Mary, you brought up technical assistance. What would you say was the most useful in launching Lynden Hop in terms of state, federal, or otherwise technical assistance? And what would you recommend to agencies considering a similar pilot?
Yeah, so I would say the monthly meetings that Alvaro led were great. So we had, I think we're split into maybe 2 different cohorts depending on our project types. I don't know, he could probably speak to this more than I can. But basically we met monthly, and there were, I don't know, maybe like 12 to 15 of us that just talked about our project. Like, this is where I'm at in the stage of it. We're ordering vehicles, and we could share our joys and sorrows with each other of, procurement and all the other things. And like, what are you doing for marketing? And hey, how are you collecting cash fares? And what's your technology system look like? So that was really helpful, just to learn from the other agencies who were, we're all kind of walking along the same path. Some of us were, or others, I shouldn't say us, because ours, I think, launched, I don't know, definitely not first, but, that we could, all learn from each other as we're, each doing these, demonstration projects ourselves. So that was super helpful to have that assistance. And then once the projects were all kind of wrapping up, we did also have that technical assistance for the passenger surveys, and the group came out and did actually rode in the vans and talked to some of the riders, and then held a listening session type thing in the evening as well, to really get in-depth information from the passengers. And then they also talked to staff as well. So both of those, both of those groups providing the assistance was great. Our FTA staff person, Nazi, who sadly is no longer with the FTA, was also great as well. So another person in the finance team, Erin, and I would meet with her. Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember, probably also about monthly, just to talk about where we were at in the grant. And she could also help with any questions that we had, kind of more so on the reporting side, but also other questions that we might have project wise that she could put us in, connect us with other resources. Yeah, so it was definitely, I've been a part of, writing mini grants, mostly it's for buses, that's probably the primary grants that we write is for buses. And this project, or this grant, was definitely different with the technical assistance that came along with it, because that was really, really useful and different from what I've experienced with other grants. Usually it's like, okay, you got the award, yay, now go buy your buses and then we'll reimburse you. It's that simple, right, Audra? Nothing in between.
And is there anything specifically that you would recommend to other agencies wanting to start a similar pilot?
Yeah, thank you. I forgot that part of the question.
All good.
Yeah, I would say start smaller and expand out. So we started with in terms of your boundary, I would just say start smaller. And if there's areas kind of outlying areas of maybe the city that you're serving, or whatever neighborhood that you're serving, that you might think, that'd probably be good to include, I would recommend starting smaller, dialing in the service, and then expanding the service once you kind of have things figured out, because that's going to be a lot easier than if you start with a larger area and try to contract that, because it's not, that's of course possible, but it's going to be a lot harder, and it's not going to make people as excited about your service.
One other goal that we had for the program was that it would help bridge a lot more first mile, last mile, and get people to the Lynden Transit Station so that they could transfer to other buses that went all over the county. And we found that just wasn't happening with much frequency. So if you're planning on using that service to complete that first mile, last mile, look much more closely at it, because it didn't pan out for us.
Yeah, thank you.
And I guess on an internal level for WTA, was there anything that you learned from the Lynden Hop service that is now being used to inform other parts of your transit program?
Well, I think, I don't know, I can't think offhand of how it might be informing the work that we're doing right now, but I think it gave us a very, very clear idea of what it would take and what additional resources we would need if we were to implement a permanent microtransit service. So, for example, if we were to do this again, we really would need another CSR. We would need likely another dispatch personnel, somebody else, another IT. I can't remember the exact, I should have looked this up before, but I think it was like 5 more kind of support staff that ideally we would have to support this program. Because, we wrote this grant, and so it was basically just, everyone who
We absorbed it.
Yeah, we absorbed it. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. We just, absorbed it. And so really, if we were to do this again, we would, want to establish like an actual program within the agency and have a dedicated project manager who, and yeah, like I said, more CSR to book those calls and dispatch to, dispatch the drivers and deal with those issues, and then IT support as well. Yeah, just to
I
make
will
it
say
run
one
a
thing.
lot more smoothly.
One thing that I learned from a fare revenue standpoint, because I'm in finance now, is that the fare collection worked well on the Lynden Hop as far as it was integrated with our fixed route service. And so one change that we are looking at making is we've had kind of a very different separate system on paratransit, and we've seen that if the hop and fixed route can work so well with a combined fare system, would it make a lot of sense to pull paratransit into that and have some kind of joint fare capping so that people can benefit whatever mode they ride. And that wasn't really something we had looked at before the Lynden Hop. And so it was a good experiment for us to see that you can use the same fare system across 2 modes and it works.
Those are great insights. I guess along the same vein, a few years back, SUMC conducted driver interviews that offered insights into like operators' experiences with microtransit and the service in general. How has your driver's perspectives, specifically for Lynden Hop, influenced how WTA operates internally or approaches service design today?
Yeah, so like we said earlier, the transit operators loved these shifts. They were, amongst the first to go, or to sign, to get filled up. We were always doing our best to listen to drivers. Like drivers, we have a whole, process where drivers will fill out operator notes to, submit feedback, and that might go to the planning department or whatever applicable department. And then we will do our research on that and ideally get back to them. That sometimes the follow-up isn't as great as it could be. I will own up to that. However, we always look into the questions and issues that the drivers bring up. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how the drivers' perspectives influenced how we operate internally, just that we know that they appreciate having a variety of they appreciate having options, I guess, to be able to choose for their shifts. And they liked the different, they liked that it was different. And yeah, like I said, we're always, doing our best to incorporate their feedback as best we can.
One other thing that made these shifts so desirable is our service starts before 5 in the morning and it goes until after 11:30 at night. And these shifts were more in the like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. range. And so they were more daytime shifts that drivers like to work. They weren't, they didn't have splits in the middle. They weren't some of these funky kind of shifts that we have to do in a run cut to make all of the pieces work together. And so when you add all of those components of a smaller vehicle, they're driving out in Lynden where there's typically much less traffic. There's a lot of traffic in Bellingham, particularly we're like almost 40% of our ridership is Western Washington University, and those routes and those streets can get really busy, and it's really stressful on the drivers to have their schedule be determined by traffic. And so they're feeling like they're down all the time. And you just don't have that pressure when you're driving at the Lynden Hop. You have fewer passengers. So there were so many pieces of those shifts that were desirable. It's not really any wonder that they went so quickly, but they are things that are difficult for us to duplicate on all of our regular fixed route or paratransit routes. If we could think of any lessons, I would love to know what they are, but it has been been hard to duplicate with what we still currently do.
Okay, well, great. Thank you both for meeting with me today. Yeah, going to stop the recording.